Hello friends, welcome here or welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be doing my monthly reading wrap up for the month of March, and I'm so excited to share with you an array of really wonderful books that I managed to read throughout this month. For those that are unfamiliar with my particular format for these videos, I tend to film my reviews as I go, so you will see me in many different spaces and at many different times throughout March, but I hope you enjoy the video nonetheless, and without further ado, let's talk about some books. So the first book that I have to talk about for the month of March is The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the second instalment in the Daevabad trilogy, the first of which is The City of Brass. And that ended pretty explosively, to say the least. I would describe this as a politically centred historical fantasy trilogy with lots of flawed characters, a very complex environment and a very intricate magic system. It all just feels very rich and immersive and is set in a magical world inspired by the 18th century Middle East. And it uses a lot of the folklore from the Middle East as well as a good foundation for the world building in the books. As a brief overview of the trilogy, we follow our main character Nari, who has grown up in the human world in Cairo and is transported by a spell and by the jinn into the magical city of Daevabad, which is also ruled by and populated by jinn and the Shafit, who have both human and jinn heritage. This is a world that is steeped in magic and is currently under the dictatorship of the family that have wiped out Nari's ancestors. In the first book, Nari is first found by a character called Dara, and he is a very moody Deva, who we later find out is actually a massive war criminal and has created some really horrific atrocities. Nevertheless, him and Nari develop feelings for each other as she tries to uncover and discover who she is. She discovers that she is part of a long lineage of healers called the Nahids, who are revered and almost idolised in this culture, but she seems to be the last of her kind. The rest have been wiped out by the people who are still currently in power. We also meet Prince Ali, who is the son of the tyrant king in charge, and he is often seen as a radical for wanting to change the situation of the people living in Daevabad. Honestly, he's my favourite character. He's so precious and so endearing and is always the point of view that I most enjoy reading from. At times he's quite naive as a character, but he has a very good heart. One of my main complaints for City of Brass, if you watched my reading vlog or my reading wrap up for that month last year, was that it seemed a very long book for not much plot for about a third to two-thirds of the book, especially following Nari and Dara's storyline. But I'm happy to report that despite this book being so much bigger, I flew through this one a lot faster, and I think it just has a lot more momentum as a story, and the world building has been so well established in the first book that this one can just be action-packed. I'm very much looking forward to reading the third and final instalment of this book, and I foresee doing that very soon because I thoroughly enjoyed The Kingdom of Copper and I'm really eager to see what happens next. Next we have The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels by India Halton. Though this is marketed as a zany historical romance, it is so much more than that. In this novel we meet the Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels, a high-class, well-mannered Victorian-era tea society. However, these are no ordinary women. They are pirates and scoundrels who steal, assassinate and so much more, including commandeering houses which they then fly and do battle with instead of ordinary pirate ships. It's a lot to take in. There is an assassination plot, a coming-of-age plot, a romance plot, and I'm sure plenty more that I'm missing off the top of my head today, all crammed into this light-hearted and utterly ridiculous book, which follows the thread of our protagonist Cecilia Bassingthwaite, who is a junior member of the Wisteria Society, as well as Ned Lightbourne, who has been hired to kill her. And the story kind of follows the two of them as they have to work against each other or together in order to save the Wisteria Society from the evil Captain Morveth, an overbearing, poetically inclined, gothic obsessed, truly evil man. This is so creative, so hilarious, whimsical, and very very silly, but all thoroughly enjoyable. It was such a breath of fresh air and so nice to read something that was both kind of fantasy and romance, but that just really did not take itself too seriously. It does have quite a nice romance through it, but it's more than just a romance book, as I was saying, and I specifically love the flying houses, which I believe you can see just here on the cover. Speaking of, how gorgeous is this cover? So yes, if you're looking for something really fun, really silly, but also has that kind of historical element to it, it's set in the Victorian era, and it's just so nice to kind of have gender roles as well reversed for that time period. The men are often the ones in the book described as staying home, looking after the children, doing domestic tasks, while the women are out here fighting and being pirates and con artists and so much more, and that is just such a fun dynamic to read. So if you're looking for something light-hearted and whimsical and silly for the spring and the summertime, I could not recommend this more. Set in the 1600s, The Leviathan by Rosie Andrews is a historical fiction steeped in gothic sensibilities and full of mystery. Our main character, Thomas Treadwater, is summoned home during the English Civil War by his sister, who fears that their father has been bewitched by a new servant. Thomas is not particularly a great man of faith, so he's a little bit hesitant about the claims that his sister is making, but when he arrives home, he finds out that the whole situation has actually escalated so much more, and that the servant in question is now being held for accusations of witchcraft in the local prison. As he begins uncovering what's happening and why, he starts to find clues that link to a dark and ancient being or thing, and that all links back to a shipwreck that happened some years ago too. I was initially drawn to this book because this is a time period that I really enjoy reading in historical fiction. It's both incredibly interesting and intriguing, and also just truly horrifying. But the thing that made this book in particular a little bit different from the others that I've read so far was that link to a ancient shipwreck, or to kind of a long lost tale of the sea. And although you have to wait quite a while to get to that section of the book, the kind of slow burn nature of it is just so good at building tension and building this really evocative, rich and dark atmosphere, which I think enriches a book like this so much more and is so necessary. I really enjoyed the atmosphere and the unsettling tension that persisted throughout the whole book, and I think the time period in particular suited this type of tale so well. You know, that sort of mid 1600s, in the middle of the Civil War in England, and also kind of at the cusp of the Age of Enlightenment. You've got this kind of internal war, I guess, in culture at the time that goes between belief in God and belief in science, and so it was all kind of set up perfectly to address everything in this book, as well as of course adding to the general feeling of unease, unrest and great upheaval. I also really liked the inclusion of real people and real figures in history. John Milton appears in this. Obviously he is the author of Paradise Lost, and I'm pretty sure that it's not true to life, his story, but it's still really nice to have that inclusion of a familiar name. But one thing that I wasn't as keen on is that although we spend a lot of time with our main characters, I still feel like we didn't really get to know them very well. They are quite shallow as characters, and a lot of their motivations are quite one-dimensional, and we get a really limited view of how they're feeling and why they're doing things, what motivates them, things like that. But overall, I think the setting and the place and the way that that was written and how evocative and rich that world building was definitely the standout part of this novel. So if that's something that you're interested in and you want a relatively quick, easy read that's a bit more gothically leaning, then give it a go. The last two books that I have to talk about today are both non-fiction books. The first of which is Warrior Queens and Quiet Revolutionaries: How Women Also Shaped the World, written by Kate Moss. This is sort of an anthology about 1,000 women who have kind of been lost to history or just not celebrated as much as they should have been. It spans over generations and centuries and really highlights women in different fields who really really excelled in that particular thing, and sort of lets us know a little bit more detail about their lives and what they did and what we've learned from them in this day and age as well. It's a very accessible and very, very interesting read. I read it as an audiobook, and I don't really think that that's the way that this book was designed to be read, purely because it seems like the kind of book that you would dip in and out of as you just sort of wanted to be inspired or find a little bit more information about different women in different areas. But the way that I felt whilst listening to it as an audiobook was really, really special. And I say that because when I started listening to it, I thought I would feel really overwhelmed by the sheer amount of incredible women. I thought it would make me feel kind of like I wasn't doing enough. I didn't think really that it would make me feel great about myself. I just thought it would be an amazing way to get to know about women who have shaped and inspired so much of the world that we live in today. And in actuality, I just found this book comforting and inspiring and motivating. It was reassuring to know that all of these women existed and continue to exist. There's something incredible about seeing the sheer volume of women, and whilst part of me feels a little bit angry and a little bit let down that it's taken until now to recognize and celebrate these women, it also just kind of reminded me we are all in this together, and that where so many women have gone before us, so many women are going to go ahead of us as well, and we are all part of that change, and we are all part of encouraging each other. And I felt encouraged listening to this book. The book covers so many different areas and so many different sectors, I suppose, that women worked in or volunteered in or strives to make change in, and that goes anywhere from kind of the battlefield all the way to politics, to the sports world, to environmental action, to literature and writing and publishing. Anything you can think of, there's a section about it. And one of my favourite things that Kate Moss did was she linked her personal story with this. So throughout these chapters and these sections, she linked them to her great-grandmother Lily, who was a published author, but is another of these women that was forgotten about and sort of partially erased from history. And it's that really personal connection that the author has to her own kind of forgotten heroine, if you will, that makes it such a accessible read. And when I was listening to it as an audiobook, those were my favourite segments, because I felt like I was learning about someone who was important on a kind of more intimate level with the author, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. My final read is Dara McNulty's Diary of a Young Naturalist, and this is quite probably my favourite book that I read this month. This is a non-fiction diary of an autistic naturalist called Dara. I believe he was 16 or 17 when he wrote this in lockdown, and it's compiled of these beautiful diary entries by Dara throughout the seasons. Not only is the book beautiful and lyrical and focuses predominantly on the natural world and his experience of it, but it also has these tricklings of finding your way and finding your purpose. It's incredibly rich in detail and depth, and really this wonderful and beautiful intimate relationship that he has both with his family and with nature. You come along with him on that journey, and you kind of see the natural world that he's experiencing through his words and through his thought process. And as someone who is autistic, he is experiencing this in a really intense, vivid way, and that comes through wonderfully in the book. Alongside his narrative voice about engaging with the natural world, it also discusses him being kind of uprooted from a family home and moving in the year, changing schools, his own mental health, and also him starting to pursue conservation work and environmental kind of climate change action as well, and wanting to progress in that. It's a really, really, really beautiful, lyrical, raw book, and it is just a masterpiece. I can't believe that a teenager wrote this, and yet only a teenager could have written this, if that makes sense. He just has such a wonderful way of capturing emotion and feeling passionate about looking after the natural world. So if you like nature writing and you like poetry, but you want to read something that isn't poetry, this is absolutely gorgeous and poetical. So I would highly, highly recommend if you're looking for something by a neurodivergent author as well. even better. So that concludes my reading wrap up for March. I hope you enjoyed it. Do let me know what you are reading and enjoying down in the comments below, or your own thoughts and feelings about any of the books that I have mentioned in today's video too. Feel free to like and subscribe. I would love to have you back. I make videos every single Sunday and I would love to see you back here again. As ever, take care and I will see you soon in another video. Goodbye.